Hello. I want to take some time to go over some stuff that I keep seeing in Discord about, how do I record myself playing into my computer? How do I multi-track guitars? What should I be doing for one of these Ola Riff challenges? And I want to kind of distill everything into a pretty short video. So this is going to be a lot of information very quickly. If there's anything in here you want me to go over in more detail or a topic I didn't cover that maybe I know something about, please leave a comment and I will try to either respond or make some kind of follow-up video if I think that'd be helpful. Okay, so in order to have your guitar talk to your computer, you need some sort of specialized hardware. It's not really specialized. Anyway, the first thing you obviously need is an in-tune guitar. So if your guitar is not in tune, or you don't know if it's in tune, stop the video, tune your guitar, and come back. Alright. Secondly, obviously you need a computer. I got a MacBook Pro in front of me, but really any computer is probably fine for this. Thirdly, you need an audio interface. Something like this, or something like one of the desktop ones, like a Focusrite Scarlett 2i2, or if you happen to have a Helix, I have a Line 6 Helix LT on the floor here that is also an 8-in, 8-out audio interface. But essentially, to be very reductive, an audio interface takes a guitar signal in, or instrument signal, puts it through a preamp, which you control with this gain knob, and puts it through an analog to digital converter and out a USB to your computer. It shows up on your computer as an audio device. And my recommendation with these, with any audio interface, is to use the clipping designator on it and turn down the gain so that you're just outside of clipping range. And really, you should turn it down even more than that. For the apogee, they have this 3 LED bar right here that you can just barely see, and it'll go from green to yellow to red. And I keep it in green, even with my hard picking. I try to keep it in green. Honestly, it's just about being consistent. I don't like overdriving preamps. I like having as clean a signal to start with as possible, so I keep it in green. So let's talk about the software you're going to need in order to do this. For just jamming along, you can just get away with using a standalone plugin, something like Neural DSP or Amplitude or Bias Effects or something like that. If you want to actually be able to mix and record and all this stuff, you're going to need a DAW. There are a bunch of different DAWs out there. The one on the screen right now is Ableton Live, and there's also Cubase and Reason and Logic X and all of these different DAWs that you can choose from at all sorts of different price points with different features. My recommendation is to choose one. Most people start out with Reaper, but just choose one, learn it, and sort of master it, because DAWs are giant, complex programs that have a lot of features. And honestly, you can get away with just having one. The other thing you're going to need, besides a DAW, as I mentioned, is something to actually process your guitar sound. So let me show you an example of what I mean here. So I have this dry track from my guitar from when I did the video for Ola 39, and it sounds like this. So obviously that is unprocessed guitar straight from the pickups through my preamp. That's what you get. So what we're going to do is we're going to add an amplifier. So this is archetype Nolly, and these Neural DSP amps are really good, and they come with both the amplifier and the cab and some effects. I tend to I really only use these when I'm sort of scaffolding things out. I like to reamp using my Helix and my Rev G20 afterwards, but this will get you pretty far. And you could even create fully finished tracks with this, no problem. So this is what it sounds like with Archetype Nully added to it. Pretty good. I love that preset, and it's sort of my go-to preset whenever I do this stuff. The other thing you can do is actually reamp it, which requires something like a DI box or a Helix, which I'm not going to get too far into, but I mean the result is essentially the same, where I have this wet lead, which is my reamped version. So it was using sort of what I had put up on the Rev and the Helix at the time. I think I've tweaked it a little bit since then, but you're always tweaking. Anyway, the point is, either way works. Either way is perfectly acceptable. But those are the sort of the two core pieces of software you need: is a DAW with all the kind of plugins that come with it, as well as something to actually process your guitar signal, be it something like a Helix setup or an Archetype Nully sort of thing. Okay, so every week Ola gives us a new drum track to work with. You can see it up here. I called it Source just because I tend to take drum tracks apart a lot of the times in order to create grooves out of them, or sometimes I cut them up and I extend them. For example, part C here has been extended because I wanted to give the lead part at the end of it a little more room. But the drums simply sound like this, and you'll notice that I have this plugin down here, but it's turned off, and I just normally just use the drums as they are. I consider them pre-mixed, and I build everything else around the drums. So the drums for this Ola sound thusly. So that's the basic idea. And what you'll notice is I have these sort of lanes here, and I've labeled them part A, part B, part C, and these are called locators. And these are something that are built into Ableton. I'm sure there's something similar in other DAWs as well, but you can just come up to create, hit add locator, it'll pop the new one, you can enter a name for it. And it's a good way to keep track of your sections, and it's super easy for me to see, okay, I want to loop this area here, so I'm going to loop that or whatever, and for whatever part I happen to be working on at the time. And you can also just hit this position here and instantly go to that playhead position, and it'll start playback from that point. And that's basically it. So up next are the guitars, and you'll see a bunch of guitar stuff going on here. You'll notice that these guitars are audio 7, audio 8, audio 10, audio 11, etc. The thing to keep in mind when you're doing these swolas is that you're never going to get it in the first take, almost ever. Nobody does that. This was take 7 and take 8, this was take 10 and take 11, this was take 10 and take 5. Even this end piece took me a few takes before I got something that I like. What I recommend doing is, you can see that I've got this region here looped, right? So I can loop. and it'll just keep going and going and going. And then what I can do is at least in Ableton in the session view, I can take wherever I want to actually record. So say lead dry, I could arm that track. If I had an audio interface actually plugged in, I'd be able to arm it, and I can start recording directly into that clip, and I'll still have the looping happening in the background. You could also take that section over into somewhere else in your timeline, put like 6 of them down in a row, and record 1 6 iteration take, or different DAWs are going to have their different ways to do it. This is Ableton 11 beta, so Ableton 11 actually has take lanes. So what I can do now is just arm whichever track I want to record into, create my loop, start recording, and every single time it loops around, it'll create a new take lane, and then I can just pick and choose which of the takes I want. So what I do a lot of the time is have one audio track that I record into, have my left and right dry tracks already set up and panned how I like them, and then once I have my 2 takes, I just click and drag them right into the dry left and dry right, and that way they're right where I need them. And it's I think take lanes is probably my favorite feature of Live 11 so far. It's made that part of my process very easy. But yeah, TLDR, multiple takes, use looping to your advantage, and lastly, don't just if audio 10 is perfect, don't put audio 10 in both of these slots for both the left and the right guitar, because what ends up happening is if you have the exact same audio playing in your left cup as your right cup, they're going to sound like the same thing, just centered. Let me show you an example. We can always revert this in a minute, but let's assume we have these guys turned on, and I have this turned. Oh, I'm soloing it. That's fine. Turn this off too. But so right now it kind of just sounds like the one track centered, whereas if there we go. If I put this back to how I had it before, turn these things back off, and turn this guy on, and we go through this again. You hear that? It's a compare it. We can A/B it, I guess. See how that just sounds like it's in the center of the stereo field? But when I have 2 different takes, and that's all I'm doing is 2 different takes of the exact same thing, and that's not even with any distortion on it. That's just the raw guitar signal. But the fact of the matter is, even if you have the same player on the same guitar play the same riff twice, there are going to be very subtle variations, and that's going to end up letting you hear the difference, and really it's going to make your guitars sound a lot bigger. That then comes into making the rhythm section just sound massive. It's certainly better than just having one of them. To sort of fill out your spectrum, we're also going to use bass in order to fill out that bottom end a little and thicken everything up. So up next, we're going to take a look at bass MIDI and using some Ableton grooves to make it swing a little better. Okay, bass. I program all my bass because I don't own a bass, and I don't really have the desire at this very moment to purchase one. And by desire, I mean funds. So let's pop one of these open. So Ableton has this pretty good clip editor that lets you go through here, and all of these are just placed by hand. Get used to your MIDI editor. Getting used to it is a pretty good thing. But these bass parts are literally just repeats of each other, 1 1 2 2, and they don't have to be specifically like involved, but there are a couple things you can do. For one, you can play around with these velocities. So this velocity is basically how hard you're hitting the bass. And what I like to do is I'll chop this up into part A, B, and C, sort of like what I did here, and then I'll create grooves out of those parts. So I have groove A, B, and C, and then those actually end up getting applied to this bass, and you can't really see it on these ones. You can kind of see it right here. It'll subtly change things, and it'll suddenly change the quantization, like the alignment of the notes, to make it swing a little better or groove a little better, I guess, with the bass. And it's a really easy way to humanize your bass without having to go and buy Easy Bass or something like that, or go out and buy your own bass. Cool. So there are a couple ways to make sure that the bass and the guitars and the drums don't all stomp on top of each other while you're going through this, and that's some EQing tricks, and that's what I'm going to be talking about next. So with all of these different tracks, all of these different instruments have sort of their own frequency spectrum, and because of the way string instruments work and harmonics work, you're going to end up with those frequencies sort of bleeding into other spectrums, and because of where these instruments sit, they don't necessarily perfectly sit in their own band of the frequency spectrum. They're going to overlap a little bit. Like the bass is going to have, you're going to be using some of the same frequencies as the drums, and the bass might be using some of the same frequencies as the low end of the guitar, and you kind of want to just clean all that stuff up. And what that's going to do is allow you to hear everything clearly without having to jack the volume on everything. So when you're trying to prep your mix for EQing, the first thing you're actually going to do is get all the volume levels figured out. And the best way to do that is to use the mono utility or something, or whatever your DAW supports to make your audio into a mono track. You're going to then get everything so that they're all relatively the same volume as each other. Nothing's overpowering everything else. And then we're going to move on to listening to our audio track back in stereo and starting to go through instruments one by one and tailoring the EQ. So you'll notice, for example, that this electric bass has a couple of things on it. Low end is very tricky to get right. So what I normally do, especially when I get giving these pre-processed drum tracks from Ola, I will use a combination of a multiband compressor and an EQ8. So with multiband compression, I really only use the low band. This one is targeting around 88 Hertz. And I have it set up so that when the drums get particularly loud in those frequencies, which happens a lot when the kick drum is booming, the bass will actually duck, and that'll let the kick drum pierce through the mix so that you can actually hear it. Likewise, with the EQ curve, you'll see that I have a notch around just under 200 Hertz. That's where the snare sits. And then I have another small dip around 1K, which is where the guitars sit. And by doing this, I'm allowing plenty of space for the bass to breathe without actually muddying everything else up in the mix. The guitars are a similar story. I have a cut normally around 90 hertz or so, just to cut out low end from the guitar that you're never going to hear anyway and just kind of conflicts with the bass. A very small dip to let the bass be a little more in the mix. And then I have a notch here at around 6.5K, and then a cut just above that. So the cut just kind of gets rid of any weird ringing or grainy hissiness, and the notch actually allows the cymbals to come through. You might be asking yourself, how do I know that the cymbals are at 6.5K and that a snare is at around 187 hertz? I'm glad you asked. And you might have also noticed that the drums have an EQ8 that is disabled with this crazy spike here. So that's a pretty large Q value with a large gain. And what you can actually do with this is just sweep it. You can sweep it through the spectrum and you can find the particular instruments that you're looking for, and then on other tracks you can dip at that frequency if you haven't already cut. And when you dip, you're not going to be using 15 decibels of gain. You want to be using kind of a smaller Q, so it's a more gradual dip and only a couple decibels. It's really supposed to be just the subtle thing to let the other part come through. This is also a really good way to find problematic frequencies that you don't necessarily want in your mix, and you can drop those frequencies with a narrow Q just by a decibel or two, so that they don't ring through as much and sound like they're ruining your mix. Okay, so once you have all that stuff done, it's time to do your video. You'll notice that I have this lead dry and lead wet and video track all as three separate things. So what I do with my video tracks is I have a camera, which is way behind me and in the back corner. That camera is what is actually recording me playing. So I'm sitting in the other direction with the monitor and the rev and everything else in view. You frame nicely and all that stuff. And what that really does is it allows me to get a higher resolution than what I can do on this computer, because this computer is not great. So what I'll do is I'll record the video, and at the same time as I'm recording the video, I'll record from my Helix. I'll record the dry track, which is this lead dry track here. And then once I've finished and I'm happy, I will reamp the dry track into a wet track, and I will do my EQing. On this one I happen to use a hybrid reverb as well, but only for the last section using automation, which is sort of a whole other topic in itself. And then what I do is I take the video and I overlay it as its own track, and you can do that just by dragging and dropping a video file straight into this drop files and devices here section. It'll create it'll create a track for it, and you'll be able to use that to play it back. And then what you can do is you can crop your video on both sides and align it with your lead dry. What I like to do is I will start the video, I'll start the guitar recording, and I'll have the guitar on my lap, and I'll count 1, 2, 3, 4. I don't know if you can see my hand right now, but I'm smacking the guitar on the count as well. And what that's going to do is it's going to give me 4 very distinct pulses in both the video audio track and the guitar audio track. And then I can line those two things up, and now my video and my guitar are in sync with each other. I don't have to worry about time codes or any of that crap. Once you do that, you get your video put in, you crop the ends, and you can export it. Ableton supports exporting video. You export it. You'll see here that the video is completely silenced. You just export it to an MP4, and then that is something that you can upload directly to YouTube. And that's it. Easy, right? If you have any questions, comments, concerns, things I missed, things you want me to go more into, other topics you'd like me to discuss, feel free to drop a comment, or you can hit me up on Instagram at alex.hart658, or if you're on Ola's Discord, you find me on Discord. I am Hart. But thanks for watching, and see you next time.